So the semester has come to a close, and even though I do still want to continue my journaling of what it means to be a doctoral student and how that process works and all its many facets, I was also looking forward to this opportunity now that I have a little break from coursework, because I literally finished yesterday, to talk about something that has been sort of in the back of my mind as a great topic to put out there for a while, and that is a specific aspect of literacy. So in this first video, I want to, one, tell you what I'm talking about, and two, give you a little preview of what I want to cover. So first, literacy in games. But before you can really understand what I mean by that, is we need to really talk about what literacy is. There's a lot of different ways to look at literacy. The more old-fashioned way is to look at literacy as the ability to read and write. But how that ability is judged depends on when and where we're talking about. It wasn't that long ago that even in the United States, to be considered literate, all you had to do was sign your name and be able to read portions of the Bible. And the way they judged your ability to read was your ability to recite. So, I don't know about you, but I have some wonderful 3-year-old nieces and friends of, children of friends that can read entire books to me because they can recite them. Didn't actually require any proof of any sort of ability to read, but that made you literate. Now, the more modern idea of literacy, and not shared by everyone, granted, but one of the more modern concepts is that it's the ability to, with text of some kind, communicate thoughts, feelings, beliefs, to give some sort of description or information. And that brings us to this other really difficult part. What is text? And text can be defined a lot of different ways. You can define it very strictly as the written word, but it can be more than that. Being literate today can mean so many different things. Think about a football player who's extremely literate in football. That means they can read the play. They can look at what an offense or a defense is showing and read it to understand what they're communicating about what they're about to do, even though they're trying to hide it. That's a kind of literacy that's really far off from the traditional sort of literacy, but it's just as valid. It involves prior knowledge of what football is and what football plays look like, combined with being able to read gestural cues that are communicating what the football team is trying to do. It's a really complex system. And it's an incredibly intricate and unappreciated form of literacy. And I don't just mean football, although I am a big fan. I'm talking about all sorts of athletic literacy. A lot of time doesn't get focused on. And the only reason that seems really detrimental to me is that when kids are good at it, it's not valued in the same way. And so they see it very differently. They don't recognize, hey, I'm literate. I'm really good at understanding something. And then because I'm good at understanding that, I might be good at understanding other things. I'm totally getting off topic, sort of. Because that's why I want to talk about the literacy of games. Being really literate in games is incredibly complex. It involves more traditional forms of literacy as well as some of these newer and more modern conceptions. It totally depends on the game, and I just pulled a few out to talk about some of the things I want to touch on in these videos, because there's so many different types of games. It means there's so many different ways that you have to be literate if you're a quote-unquote gamer. Right now what I have in front of me is Tabletop exclusively. I am at best a casual video game player, and so my ability to speak on those topics is, one, not very high, and two, certainly can't compete with some amazing people who are already out there giving explanations of different aspects of literacy within games. So I'm not even going to try or go there simply because it's not my skill or my talent. But, sorry, a little sick. That's why there's tea. From Catan. Alright, some really basic things about modern tabletop gaming, because this is a medium that has exploded in the last few decades. And the variety that you now have access to makes those of us who grew up with like Monopoly and Clue just amazed every day that games come out that play the way they play. So there's a lot of different kinds, and let's just talk some basics. This is Zombie Dice. It's a dice playing game. It involves rolling dice, following rules, doing some basic math. But there's something that I think is going to be at the core of a lot of our literacy discussion when it comes to games, and that's going to be strategy. Because it's not enough to know the rules. In the same way that we no longer think it's enough to be able to read a book and just decode it, to be able to say, oh, the cat jumped over the log. That's not enough anymore, as far as educators are concerned, and as far as researchers are concerned, and honestly, as far as parents are concerned. You want your kid to be able to understand what they're reading, but more than that, you want them to use that understanding to do something else. And in gaming, that is what the strategy is. It's not enough to understand the rules. It's not enough to be able to read what's going on in the game. You have to use that understanding to do something, to make smarter plays yourself. That is the essence of gaming literacy. In a dice game, like Zombie Dice, it's pretty simple. And I'll go into a lot of these more later. It's tempting. I just want to explain it all right now. I'm going to make myself put the dice away. Dice games. This is wonderful because it combines literacy with numeracy. And I want to be clear about that as well, as I will talk about numeracy a lot. It's certainly another passion of mine, and that is a familiarity and comfort with numbers that is separate from mathematical literacy. And I'll talk more about that at some point, probably when I talk about Zombie Dice, because it is such a math-based game. To a certain extent, all of these have math at their core, but dice games more than almost any other, just because of how probability plays into those games. Now, this is a game like Timeline. Timeline is a card game, exclusively. It has no other parts other than the players and their minds. This is important because most games that come out are a combination of cards and dice. So we have exclusively dice, we have exclusively cards. The way that you become literate and strategic in these games is going to be different. Settlers of Catan. This is kind of considered the seminal work in modern gaming. If you are a tabletop gamer today, you play or have played Settlers of Catan. You've at least heard of it. It's part of your background and your prior knowledge of how gaming works. It's an amazing game. It's so complex. You'll hear a lot when you talk to nerds like me about gaming is replayability. It has a decent amount of replayability. You don't get bored with how the game works. Monopoly, Clue to a certain extent. Like, these games, you could only play them so many times before it was just old hat and you wanted to tell your little brother to no! You wanted to tell him to no. You want to tell him no! I don't want to play that game anymore. That's a dumb game. That's a baby game. Because once you played it enough, it was boring. Oh, better examples. Chutes and Ladders, Candyland. Those games had so much, for one thing, chance in them that you didn't want to play them anymore. Also, they were the same. They never changed. There's no way to change the game. Catan really changed that. And it did it mostly through the use of its game board. If you'll notice here, it's a picture of the game board. Now, this looks complex to someone who's not into gaming and might be intimidating, and so you wouldn't be as likely to pick it up off the shelf and go for it. It's got cards, it's got dice, it's got a lot of complicated rules. Although once you start playing, it's not so bad. But the biggest feature is this board. You can't tell here, and we'll get into it more when we pull this game apart and really look at it. But each of these pieces is individual. It's not a solid game board. And what that means is that you can rearrange both the board and these little circles that have numbers and letters on them into infinite, seemingly, not infinite, math, into a lot of different combinations, which changes at least a little bit the way the game is played every single time. So, that is Settlers of Catan. Big game changer. Now, this is by far not the first of this game type, but Pandemic might be the best known of it. And this is a cooperative game. I love cooperative games. Oh my goodness. And we're talking about literacy and social practice. Cooperative gaming is where it's at. In a cooperative game like Pandemic, you are not competing against the other players. Instead, you're competing against the game itself. If you want to check out Will Wheaton on Tabletop at Geek and Sundry for an explanation of what's amazing about being in a cooperative game, I highly recommend it. I don't know if I can do it justice, even though I love these types of games, because I am so competitive. It makes it not fun to play with me. Unless I'm playing a cooperative game, and then my competition is your competition too, and we can win together. That's why I love games like this. It makes me feel less weird. An amazing thing. So many games now like this. Forbidden Desert, Dead of Winter. I won't get into Betrayer aspects until we look at some of those games if we have a chance. I'm really planning on doing these videos throughout the holidays, so I'm looking forward to it. Cooperative games. A big game changer again. Now this is the explosion of tabletop gaming, but it comes in large part because of some really dedicated gamers that got it all started. In all of these games, to some extent, there's an aspect of pretend, of play. You're playing in a world that is not the same as ours. You are, in fact, role-playing. Now, I do not play Dungeons and Dragons, nor do I know anyone who does, unfortunately, which means I don't have access easily to any of their manuals, because although I am that big of a nerd, I don't play D&D, I play Pathfinder. It's D&D with another name. Shh, don't tell anyone. It's amazing, and the amount of literacy required once you dig this deep into nerddom is off the charts. As an educator, the more I look at games like this, the more I realize that if you could get kids interested in something like this, they are going to develop all the literacy skills you want them to have. Now then, helping them transfer those skills, that's another job. But getting them those skills is huge. And this is the way to do it. This, boom, this is called the core rulebook. I have several others. There's so much just of the basic reading aspect of literacy that goes into playing a game like this, playing it well, that even if that's all literacy was, I would really advocate games like these. But it's not. Literacy has so much more to it, and so does this game. Now, the very first thing I'm going to do, because it's timely, because I'm having some friends over Monday. This, by the way, guys, is Friday, so I have to really get on it. It's going to be my weekend obsession. Whee! Is that I'm going to be running a game of Dread. The other great reason for starting off with Dread is that it is more or less open source. You can download this entire manual on how to play and give it a go. It works with one of the most interesting game mechanics I've ever seen. It's a Jenga tower. Well, sorry, it's a block tower. It doesn't have to be Jenga. It can be any tower of blocks. As a matter of fact, I don't actually own Jenga. I own a block tower, which I use to run Dread. And I'm going to do a lot more explaining of that in the upcoming videos. I'll give you the first thing that I have to do. And imagine the literacy that's going to be required for me to do these simple setup parts. Before we even get to the night we play the game, this is what I'm going to have to do. Because Dread, unlike Pathfinder, big book, this is a lot of reading. Dread, although this looks large, also includes a lot of appendixes and extra stuff, and this is all there is to go on. What I'm going to have to do is, within the mechanic of the game and how the game functions, which, by the way, is super basic. It's basically, I make a story, and then we all tell the story together, and things either work out or they don't based on pulling Jenga blocks out. Sorry. Tower blocks. Blocks from a tower. Tiny pieces of wood that are unstable as you pull more and more of them out. And things only go well as long as we continue to succeed at pulling out those little blocks. When we fail, and the tower comes crashing down, that is when everything goes in our story. Again, Will Wheaton does all of this better than I can, but he's doing it for a very different reason. He is promoting tabletop gaming. It's a wonderful show. I highly recommend it. He does do a 2-part Dread episode that's amazing, but the difference in my videos is that I'm focusing on the literacy of it. They're all fun, and perhaps they won't seem that fun after I talk about them, so definitely watch his videos, because I don't want to make these seem boring. They're not. I got off topic again. So prepare for Dread. I'm going to have to figure out a story. If D&D and Pathfinder are reading heavy, think of Dread in a way as writing heavy. I'm going to have to create. I'm going to have to come up with some sort of world for my characters to inhabit. Once I've done that, I then have to create a questionnaire. This is from one of my past Dread runners. And what it is I've come up with a series of questions about the characters that are going to inhabit the world I'm creating. I don't come up with these answers. The people who are going to play this game with me, they come up with the answers. So not only is the creation really heavy on my side, it'll be really heavy on my player's side, which is always true to a certain extent in D&D, but Dread has a really big up front, because a big workload up front, because none of the rules have been set out in long, extensive manuals. There's something that we have to create together. Everything in the world will behave however I decide it does, and the characters will have and act however they decide that they do. It's so much fun. It might not seem like it, but that's a huge amount of literacy, and that, again, that's just really kind of scratching the surface at some of those really basic literacies as we play the game. And I will see if they're willing to have it recorded. They probably won't, because we're all nerds and we don't always like to have everyone see us do silly things. And that's okay. I'll describe it as best I can. I'll take notes while I'm doing it. But there's going to be a lot of those extra literacies that are going to come in. We're going to have to act at a social situation that's way beyond normal, but still hold a lot of the literate practices that we come into it with, those cultural aspects of literacy that we all have. I get this from a lot of different research, and if anyone ever actually cares, I can always send you the references. I'm talking this particular video, I read some Rueda, I'm probably pronouncing the name wrong, but I read Snow, Burns, and Griffin's article about literacy and reading. I've read several, so if anyone really wants those, I'm more than happy to give them out. Very few of the things I'm saying are my own ideas. I'm just connecting them together and trying to look at them at something that hasn't been examined really carefully, in my opinion, and that is tabletop gaming specifically. Video games get a lot more looking at, I think, because they have a longer history, as crazy as that sounds, because we think of video games as being really new and cutting edge, and tabletop games is old, because, I mean, how long have people been playing Go, or chess, or Mahjong? But the renaissance of gaming, I think, has changed things up considerably, and warrants having a fresh look at what gaming requires of people. So that's the plan. This video is way too long. I'm so sorry. It'll take YouTube forever to upload it. And I will shortly be coming back with a second one, because hopefully I will have my world fleshed out a little bit by tomorrow. We'll see.